Hi, everyone. Give me one moment. My name is Kate Lewandowski. I am an accessibility specialist here at the National Deaf Center. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm a white woman with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. I'm wearing a black shirt, and I have a dark black background as well. So welcome to our November webinar on Assistive Listening Systems, or ALS. We have a fantastic presentation prepared for you. Very soon, we will be sharing the PowerPoint slide. All right, I will go ahead before we get started. I will let you know that as a federally funded program, we do not endorse any specific products, agencies, vendors, or other services. And the information here should not be considered as any type of endorsement. But with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Sarah Sparks. And I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Sparks, to begin. Thank you.
Hello there. I'm so happy to be with you all today, presenting on assistive listening systems. This is an area that I'm really passionate about because I use assistive listening systems myself, in addition to setting them up for people that I work with. So I'm very much looking forward to talking with you about this. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Next slide. So just a little bit about me before we get started. I am an audiologist and I'm also deaf. In addition to being an audiologist, I do have some education in related areas. For example, I have a master's degree in early childhood education and have done some additional graduate certificate work in deaf and hard of hearing infants, toddlers, and families, and infant toddler mental health. So I try to keep myself really well informed about related areas that are in addition to audiology. I have a small online private practice called Audiology Outside the Box. And in addition to that, I'm a full-time educational audiologist in a large public school system. So that is what I do. So currently work full-time as an educational audiologist. I also am an adjunct instructor in the Doctor of Audiology program, from which I graduated myself. So I teach their audiology students sometimes, and I also teach classes that are audiology for non-audiologists. So that is something that I do as well. My own communication, I switch back and forth between ASL, spoken and written English during the day. So I am very much about flexible communication, and I use 2 cochlear implants to hear. Next slide. All right, so what are assistive listening systems in the first place? They're hearing technologies that are designed to enhance listening ability in challenging situations. So they're not the same as hearing aids, cochlear implants, or BAHA devices that you may have heard about or you may use yourself. These are for enhancing listening ability, particularly for distance situations and noisy situations. Some of these are also referred to as remote microphone hearing assistive technologies. So you might see that abbreviation that's on the slide here, RMHAT. Some examples of these that are pretty commonly in use are digital modulated systems, frequency modulated systems, and classroom audio delivery systems. So the last one on there, classroom audio delivery systems, are technically going to be a sort of DM or FM system, but I put that on here on the list as well because I know that a lot of people use these kinds of systems and may have questions. Next slide, please. All right, so why are assistive listening systems necessary? Really, they're necessary to decrease the impact of challenges for listening in the classroom in the case of students. They're also used to decrease the impact of challenges in other kinds of listening situations that are not a classroom. So one of the challenges that people tend to face in classrooms and other situations is reverberation of sound. So what that means is that the sound bounces off the walls. A person who has auditory access is going to hear the sound as it comes from the sound source itself. So the person who is talking, but they're also going to hear some parts of it again as it bounces off the walls and surfaces that are in the room. So that can create this echo effect that makes it very difficult to hear and to understand. There are also noise sources in classrooms, labs, other kinds of educational settings that can be very challenging to deal with. Noise sources, although they can be filtered out to a certain extent by the person's hearing aids, cochlear implants, or other personal hearing device, noise sources don't completely go away. So because they don't completely go away, ALS helps to overcome those. And also overcoming distance from the instructor or talker. A person who is a further distance away from the person who is talking is going to have a harder time hearing them, especially if they use hearing devices. Next slide. So one very general category of ALS is ALS for individuals as opposed to ALS for groups. You will probably see these described in some places as personal ALS, but I don't have them described that way here because I didn't want to create any confusion. These are ALS for individuals. So they may be owned by the school or owned by someone else who's not the individual, but they're meant for use by an individual. So what they do is enable streaming from the speaker's microphone, which is called a transmitter. We'll get to that in a moment, to receivers that are on a person's personal hearing aids, bone conduction devices, or cochlear implants. So these ALS devices for individuals don't cause sound to fill up the whole room. The sound goes directly to the ears of each person who has a receiver on their personal hearing devices. Next slide. So how these individual ALS systems work. Every one of these systems must have two parts in addition to the person's personal hearing devices. There has to be a transmitter, and that is the microphone that the talker is wearing. And there has to be a receiver. So the receiver is a device that attaches to personal hearing aids, bone conduction devices, or cochlear implant processors. And that enables streaming from the microphone to the transmitter. One thing you might be wondering at this point is it possible to use an individual ALS if the person doesn't have personal hearing devices? And yes, it still is possible. You can use headphones to listen to many types of personal ALS. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well. One fun fact is that with some of the manufacturers, receivers have now become available in digital downloads. So there are fewer visible receivers for newer hearing devices, and it may eventually be the case that all receivers end up being uploaded for personal ALS connection to personal hearing devices. So we'll see where that goes in the future, but right now this is pretty limited, and that's just the direction it seems to be going. Next slide. So this is an example of how an individual ALS works. So what you see on the slide to the left of the slide, if we move all the way from left to right very slowly, at the far left, you see an audio source. So the audio source can be a person talking into a microphone. Typically it is a person talking into a microphone, but it might also be music that is connected to the transmitter. So the audio source has the transmitter. So if it's a person who's talking into a microphone, they might be wearing the transmitter around their neck, or it might be clipped on a lapel mic to their shirt. in some way the transmitter will be close to where they are. And then the transmitter transmits the sound to a receiver. So there are some different receiver setups. There are different kinds of receivers. If we go to the right of the slide at the very top, one way is using built-in telecoil, and we'll talk a little bit more about telecoil in a moment. But you see that the person is wearing a neck loop that is connected to a receiver that they wear. That neck loop is an induction loop that connects to something called telecoil that's inside the person's hearing devices. If we move down to the second one, the next option is an ear level wireless receiver. So that is a receiver that is either physically connected or digitally uploaded to the person's hearing devices. And then the last one at the bottom is actually very uncommon to see today, and that's direct audio input, or DAI. So in this case, there is a larger receiver that is connected physically by a cord to the person's personal hearing devices. So again, this isn't very commonly seen today, but for some older hearing aids and older cochlear implant processors, you might still see it from time to time. Next slide. So these are some examples of transmitters. Like I said, a transmitter is the microphone that the person who is talking is going to wear, or that the sound source is going to come through. So these are just a few examples of transmitters. You see that the one on the far right has a lapel mic that the person can clip to their shirt. The one in the middle actually has a lapel mic as well. That little black piece to the very far right side of it is a lapel mic. And then the one to the very far left is worn on a lanyard around the neck. So they can look a variety of ways, some different ways. Next slide. And these are some examples of receivers. So on the far right of the slide in the top row, you see that there's a neck loop receiver. So that one can be used with telecoil. But then all the others you see on this slide as examples are those receivers that will directly connect to a person's personal hearing devices. So some of them are for hearing aids, some of them are for cochlear implants. These are just examples of what a receiver might look like that you might see. Next slide. And this is an example of digitally uploaded receivers. So what I have here on the picture, there is sort of an upload pad. So what ends up happening is that the receiver, which is the tiny little block piece that you see in the picture, that gets connected to the digital uploader pad. The hearing aid is put on top of the pad, and then the receiver is uploaded into it. And the little block doesn't actually have to be physically attached to the hearing aid. What's in that block gets uploaded to the hearing aid. Next slide. So there are a lot of different situations where ALS can be useful, anything from one-on-one conversations to very large groups. So one-on-one, small group work, large group conversations, lectures, streaming video and audio files. For all of these different kinds of situations, ALS can be very useful depending upon the individual person's needs. There are some people who might benefit from ALS for large group conversations, but they feel like they don't really need it for a small group or for one-on-one. There are other people who use ALS for pretty much any kind of listening situation that they have. So they make quite a lot of use of ALS. Some people use it only for streaming video and audio files. So it's a wide variety, and people who use ALS have many different kinds of preferences. Next slide. So these are just some picture examples to put a little bit more of an image to situations where ALS can be useful. So in the picture on the left of the slide, we see a transmitter that is on a lanyard around the teacher's neck, and the teacher's talking to a group of children. So all of the children who are using that ALS would have receivers either attached or uploaded to their personal hearing devices, and they would be able to hear that. And then another ALS that you see in that same picture, if you look to the far left of the picture, there is a speaker system as well. So that speaker is part of the ALS system in the class. So kids who don't have personal hearing devices will be able to hear the sound amplified through that speaker. To the right of the slide, you see a small ALS, which I think you have to look kind of carefully to see it. In the center of the table, that is right in the middle among this small group of people. So that ALS is picking up sound from all around the table so that the person who's using it can hear, and they would have a receiver that would stream to their personal hearing devices as well. Next slide. To the left of this slide, you see an ALS transmitter plugged into a computer. So this would be for the purpose of streaming video and audio files. That's another example of when you can use ALS. And then to the right of the slide, you see a small ALS example, and you see kind of part of a person. But what I was trying to demonstrate in showing this picture is a one-on-one situation. So imagine that person is sitting across the table from another individual. The ALS there can pick up the sound from the person that they're communicating with across the table. Next slide. So just to go through some different types of ALS systems, you have probably heard of FM systems, frequency modulated systems. These are systems that used to be very, very common. So they're microphone systems that use radio waves to transmit the signal. They're older equipment. They're actually not used very often anymore. They might be used in some circumstances. Most of the devices that people call FM systems today are not actually FM systems. They tend to be DM systems, which we'll talk about next. But with the FM system, radio waves are used to transmit the signal. And we see on the slide here an example of an FM system. So the farthest device on the left is the transmitter. And then we have in the middle a neck loop with a receiver that is attached to the bottom of it. And then farthest right, we have the hearing aids that this is streaming to. Next slide. So digital modulated systems. These systems are the most commonly in use today in K-12 education, and they are used more and more frequently in higher education as well. But these microphone systems use digital technology to transmit the signal. Could we go back? Yes. Most remote microphone systems that are used by deaf children in school today are actually DM systems rather than FM systems, but you will probably see other people still calling them FM systems because it's kind of hard, to break old habits, old terminology. But because the term is more familiar, you might sometimes even see audiologists referring to DM systems. Sorry, there's an announcement overhead in the building where I am. I'm actually in a school right now, now that is over. But you might see audiologists still referring to these as FM systems sometimes, just because that's an easy term for people to understand, even though it's technically incorrect. So what you see at the bottom of the slide here, on the right side of the slide, you have some different transmitters. So they are pass around microphones that can be passed around within a classroom. There is the transmitter that I've shown on other slides earlier in this presentation that can be worn like a lanyard around the neck. It can also be placed on a table. And then the gray device that is in front of that can actually be plugged into different multimedia systems for streaming of video and audio files, the audio from the video file. Then what's to the left of that is just the charging rack for this system. And then on the left side of the slide, we have an example of a hearing aid and some different kinds of receivers that would be necessary to connect for access to the DM system. So those are DM systems. Next slide. So now we have induction loops. So induction loops involve electromagnetic induction. So there's a loop either in the room or around the person's neck that connects to telecoil that is in their devices. So if it's in a room, there's going to be a microphone system with a mixer and amplifier connected to the loop, which would be in the floor or the ceiling. Or there can be the personal loop around the neck. So a hearing aid or cochlear implant user needs to have telecoil in their devices to be able to connect to the loop. Next slide, please. So on this slide, you just see a couple of examples of how induction loops work. On the right side of the slide, you can see that there is an induction loop in the floor of the room, and it is connected to a gray device, which is the amplifier, which goes to the microphone, which is the transmitter that the person is using. So everyone who's sitting inside that loop, if they have their telecoil turned on their hearing devices, what is being said through the microphone transmitter will stream directly to their hearing devices. And on the left side of the slide, this is just another diagram of the same, how it works. There's a talker, and anybody who's sitting inside that induction loop or has an induction loop around their neck will get the sound directly to their hearing aids or cochlear implants. Next slide. And this is what telecoil actually looks like inside a hearing aid. This is a very old example of a hearing aid, but telecoil looks exactly the same if you take the hearing aid apart. Next slide. Then there are infrared systems. So these are really interesting. These use infrared light to transmit the signal. So the speaker still wears a microphone, but it's an infrared microphone transmitter, which you can see around the neck of the child who is standing in the picture to the right. That's an infrared microphone transmitter. And then the listener uses a personal infrared receiver, or in some cases, there will be a speaker system that is connected to the infrared microphone. It uses a light emitting diode, which means that the person who has the transmitter around their neck needs to be in direct line of sight for the person who has the receiver. As you can see in the left picture, this kind of system is often used in courtrooms because it has a really high level of privacy. You can't really have the kinds of interference with regard to listening to the same channel on radio waves like with FM systems. Next slide. And then Bluetooth. Everybody's interested in talking about Bluetooth these days because more and more of the new hearing aids and cochlear implants are becoming Bluetooth compatible. So the way Bluetooth works is that it uses an invisible wire connecting devices and transmitting that data through an antenna using the 2.4 to 2.285 gigahertz network. So that sounds like a whole lot of complicated stuff, but what you need to know most simply is that one device connects to another device through an invisible wire. Some Bluetooth devices are proprietary, meaning that they can't pair with other manufacturers' devices, but others can pair with any Bluetooth device. Next slide. And this is just a picture of how Bluetooth works. So without getting into the technical language that is on this slide, there is a device that is sort of the central device of the system. And this is the device that initiates the connection with the other devices. And that device that initiates the connection can pair to all kinds of devices. So if a hearing aid, for example, is that central device that initiates the connection, it can pair to all kinds of different Bluetooth devices like a laptop or a cell phone, what have you. Next slide. Classroom audio distribution systems, like I said, these are types of FM or DM systems, but they are sort of special type because they are not for individual use, they're for group use. So classroom audio distribution systems use speakers to deliver sound to the whole room, not just students with personal hearing devices and receivers. So the teacher would wear the microphone and then sound comes through the speaker and fills up the whole room. Next slide. One question I get a lot is, when you have a student who is deaf, why not just use a speaker system? Isn't that the simplest way? Why not just use a speaker system and not worry about streaming it to their devices? Well, here's the reason for that. Hearing aid and cochlear implant users struggle to hear when we are greater than 3 to 6 feet away from the sound source. And if you think about it, in most kinds of life situations, we are 3 to 6 feet away from the sound source. So speaker systems are appropriate for some folks. If someone has a hearing level in the slight to mild range, or if their hearing level is unilateral, so it's in one ear that they have reduced hearing, speaker system might be appropriate for that person, but you should definitely consult with an audiologist before making that decision. But these systems are not appropriate for many deaf people with more significant hearing levels. So this is why we can't just use a speaker system for everything. Next slide. I'm not going to get very much into the technical terminology of critical distance, but basically the idea of critical distance is that it's the place in the room where there is equality between the noise source, or sorry, the sound source and the reverberation, the bouncing off the walls that the sound is doing. So what you see in the red here on the picture is what's coming from the sound source. And then what you see in the blue is what's coming from reverberation. So one of the things that you see is that the closer to the speaker system a person is, they're going to get more of the direct sound source. And the farther away they get, they're going to get more of the reverberation and more of a mix of the sound source and the reverberation. But regardless, one of the things that you can see is that the red little sound dots are kind of dissipated even at the front, even if the person's sitting at the front. That's not quite as good as direct streaming to personal hearing devices, and that can make a significant difference for someone who has significantly reduced hearing. Next slide. Another question I get often is there a universal ALS? Unfortunately, no. Right now, there's not a universal ALS, but there are options that are compatible with many different kinds of hearing devices. So one good option is telecoil with an induction loop, including individual neck loops. Because most cochlear implant sound processors and larger behind the ear hearing aids do have telecoil. Some smaller behind the ear hearing aids and receiver in the canal hearing aids have it too, but it's becoming less and less common in these smaller hearing aids. Another good option is newer digital modulated systems. They may have universal receiver options, some of them do, but these can be very expensive technologies. And then Bluetooth is another good option, depending on what you're trying to connect to. And if you're talking about newer hearing devices that have Bluetooth compatibility. Next slide. So these are just some examples of equipment that you might see, and certainly these are not the only kinds of examples. To the left of the slide, you see an induction neck loop that actually has a Bluetooth receiver on the neck loop. So that's using electromagnetic induction and Bluetooth at the same time. Below that, we see an example of a transmitter that could connect to that receiver. And then as we move a little bit further right, we see another example of a neck loop that can plug into the transmitter that is to the right of it. And then we see a lapel mic that can plug into the transmitter rather than the receiver, so that the person who's talking can talk, and then the person who is listening can get that sound through the neck loop. Next slide. Some common compatibility issues that you might see with ALS. If the student's hearing devices have no telecoil, you might be able to use Bluetooth options for connecting to an ALS. If the student's hearing devices have Bluetooth, but it only connects to certain devices, not to every Bluetooth device, the student might need a proprietary ALS rather than something that's more generic Bluetooth. Another issue is if the student's hearing devices aren't from the same manufacturer as the DM system, check and see if the manufacturer of that DM system has universal receiver options. Next slide. Another question I often get is, what if the instructor won't use the microphone? I think the first and foremost issue to figure out is, what is the problem? What's the reason that they won't use it? And then try to address what that problem is. Very often it's concerns about germs, concerns about health. Those can pretty easily be addressed, for example, by issuing individual lapel mics to different teachers to plug into the transmitter. Another thing you can do is educate about the deaf students' rights to reasonable accommodations. This is something that is required of the instructor to do. You can educate about how to clean the device as well, using electronics wipes to clean the device after and before every use. You can offer to let the instructor rather than the student keep the device all semester. There are some possible issues with this. The instructor being responsible for it means that they could lose it just like the student could lose it. And the device would be less accessible to the student. But in certain situations, that could potentially be a solution. And if using the transmitter with lapel microphones, like I said, you could issue individual lapel mics to each of the instructors. Next slide. For selecting ALS for different kinds of listening situations, these are some questions you just want to think through. If there will be more people present, there's going to be more noise and a greater distance. If there are more people who need to use the ALS, then you're going to need more receivers, especially if you're using personal ALS, or sorry, individual ALS. You need to know what hearing devices will be used. Do they have telecoil? Do they have Bluetooth? And if the person has a personal ALS that they actually own, will they be using that, and will that be compatible with whatever system is being used more broadly in the situation? Next slide. These are some good questions that you can ask the student to make some determinations about what they might need. Get information about their hearing device manufacturers and models. Do they have the same device for both ears? Do they have different devices? You might see some students who have a cochlear implant on one side and a hearing aid on the other side, so it might not always be the same. You can ask the student, do you have a microphone or other personal device that pairs to your devices? And what are those devices? What are the microphones that you use already? You can also ask them what they use their devices for to determine, is streaming multimedia or is listening to lectures the greater need? What is the need that the student has, or what is the list of needs? Ask them if they've used ALS in class in the past. Has it worked well for them? And then also what other accommodations they have used in the past. Next slide. You can also work with the student and their audiologist, and I would really highly encourage this if possible. You might need to get the student to sign a release of information for you to work together with their audiologist as a team of 3, you, the student, and the audiologist. You can ask the audiologist and the student for individual recommendations for that student based on their needs and the existing equipment that you have. You can also tell the audiologist about the equipment you have already, and they can let you know if it's compatible or not. And you can work with local audiologists in your area to build your equipment inventory and make sure that you are getting equipment that's going to have the greatest compatibility with multiple kinds of devices. Next slide. So just some takeaways as I wrap up here. Every single deaf student is different and has different needs with regard to ALS. And there are many types of ALS for a variety of different listening situations. Choosing one to match the situation is very critical for student success. There's no universal ALS or system that works best for all deaf students, but you should explore common compatibilities like, for example, telecoil and Bluetooth. And then you can reach out to an audiologist for help if needed and work together with the student and audiologist as a team. So you definitely want to make sure that you include the student in that and don't just bypass the student and go only to the audiologist. Next. Okay, and now I am definitely ready to take your questions.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Sparks, for that fabulous presentation. Learning about the different types of assistive listening systems. We do want to open our Q&A. There we go. Let's open up the questions and answers here. We got some questions as well, just from our help desk that we typically see. One question we get is, are institutions required to provide assistive listening systems? As you just saw in the presentation, assistive listening systems are considered auxiliary aids, and institutions are required to provide those when a student with a disability asks for that. It is considered effective communication access for that student. Now, in terms of what types of ALS is provided, as you saw, as Dr. Sparks just explained, that will vary depending on the needs of the students and the devices they have. Here at NDC, we have a resource guide on assistive listening systems. So let us know if you would like more information about the process. If you have any questions or concerns on what to do in a specific scenario, you can reach out to us at the help team at any time, and we're happy to provide support. With that said, let's look at your questions. We have them lined up here. The first question we have is from Aaron McManus. More hearing aid companies are requiring licenses to be turned on in order to pair with receivers. That is an extra step that we're facing here at our university. How do we bypass that, or is there an easier way?
I'm not exactly sure what the question means here because I'm not aware of hearing aid companies requiring licenses for receivers to be turned on if they're receivers that are individual receivers that go on the hearing aid. I guess I'd need a little bit more specific information to answer the question, because typically if you have a receiver that has been purchased from the hearing aid company and it's compatible with that hearing aid, there's no reason that it can't be used with that hearing aid. So I think I'd need a little bit more specific information to try to answer the question.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe Aaron, if you could add a little bit to that, that may help us answer the question. If not, Aaron, please do reach out to us. Like I said, reach out to the help desk and we can get more information about this specific issue. The next question is for Irisema, and it says there is a lot of information in one transmitter with multiple receivers. Are there any suggestions for someone needing one receiver with multiple transmitters or various inputs?
Yeah, so there are some newer DM systems that enable use of multiple transmitters within a network. So I can't mention any specific products, but if you do look at newer digital modulated systems, there are some of those options for that. It's a lot more difficult with a more traditional FM type system. It's a lot more awkward, and you would need a mixed microphone system for different receivers to be plugged in with different transmitters. So it is a lot easier to do if you have a newer digital modulated system, but again, some of those get pretty expensive.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's move on to the next question from an anonymous attendee. I was at a conference and was asked if my hearing aids could pair with the Bluetooth microphone, but they didn't have information on how to do this. Is there a way I can find out what microphones and sound systems I can use with my hearing aids?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I would suggest before you go to a conference again is ask them what kind of assistive listening system they are using for that conference. And then look up that assistive listening system and determine if your hearing aids connect to it. So like I mentioned in the presentation, some Bluetooth devices connect only to proprietary Bluetooth devices. So some hearing aids with Bluetooth will only connect with their own manufacturer's devices that also have Bluetooth. But then there are other hearing aids, newer hearing aids that are Bluetooth enabled that will connect to any kind of Bluetooth device. So I would definitely recommend, if you are going to a conference, you should ask at the conference what kind of ALS is actually being used to determine compatibility, because there are too many systems on the market for me to provide a specific list of this one would be compatible, this one would be compatible, this one would be compatible with different kinds of hearing aids. But you can also find the technical specifications on the hearing aids themselves through the manufacturer's websites. And sometimes that will give you information about Bluetooth compatibility.
All right. This is Kate, and we have no further questions. If anyone has any remaining questions, please do use the Q&A box to pose those. Dr. Sparks, is there anything else you feel is critical for anyone to know, anything for students to know as they are preparing to attend a college or university? What advice would you give a student?
Yeah, for a student, and having been in the place of the deaf student myself, looking for what to do about assistive listening systems in the classroom, I would say work really closely with both the Disability Services Office and your audiologist as a team. If you're concerned about the possibility that your audiologist might charge you for additional time for helping you figure out assistive listening systems, you can definitely ask them that question when you go for your regular appointment. You know, I'm about to go to college, or I'm about to transfer to a new institution, and I think I'm really going to need some help with this. If I reach out to you and ask for your help, you know, do you charge a consultation fee for that? So kind of preparing for that in advance, but also working as a team with your Disability Services Office and audiologist, because your audiologist is going to be the most knowledgeable about what is compatible with your individual hearing devices. And the Disability Services Office is going to be most knowledgeable about the equipment they already have and what's going to be possible to get. And And then, of course, the student is the expert on the student's individual needs, and that is the most important. What are the individual needs? I'd also ask students, don't be shy about asking your audiologist for a letter to justify why you need a specific ALS for your situation. Because if they write a letter, the university is probably going to be more likely to not necessarily, I'm not promising that they'll get that ALS, but to consider that as a specific need for your accommodation. So don't be afraid to ask these questions and to ask for specific things. If something has helped you in the past and you know what that is already, definitely bring it up and don't be shy.
All right, thank you so much. We do have one final question before we end the presentation. And this is from another anonymous attendee here. It asks, do all hearing aids come with T-coil, or is this just with new hearing aids?
It's actually more likely for T-coil to be in older hearing aids rather than newer hearing aids. There are many newer hearing aids that don't have T-coil at all. Where you will find it more commonly is in cochlear implant sound processors and in larger behind the ear hearing aids. But in smaller behind the ear hearing aids and in receiver in the canal type hearing aids, those hearing aids are much less likely to have T-coil now, as hearing aids have gotten smaller due to the demand of many hearing aid users. There has had to be some trimming of, what's inside to make the device smaller. And the T-coil is a really easy item to get rid of if a person doesn't want it, if they're not using it. But one issue that I would say that kind of drives me crazy about some of my audiologist colleagues is that not all audiologists ask people, do they want a T-coil in their hearing aids before recommending hearing aids to them. So if you are interested in using a T-coil for your hearing aids, definitely ask your audiologist, does this model that you're recommending have T-coil? And if not, is there a different version, different variation of the same model that does have a T-coil? Because in some cases, the answer will be yes.
All right. Yes, technology changes so quickly, right? So thank you so much, Dr. Sparks, for your presentation today. We have learned a lot, and we will go ahead and close this session. You can look at the chat box for more information and links about this presentation and about NDC. If you have any further questions about access on your campus specifically, please do send us an email, and the contact information is right there in the chat. Again, thank you so much for being a part of this webinar today.